Color. You love it, I love it, your mom loves it. Color is the most illustrious feature of the visual arts and one of the most immediately seen. What's interesting though, is that while very overt and loved by all, it isn't as important as you may think. Color is among the first things noticed about a work, but its function is more supplementary than the substance. If you get a plain bagel, you can still eat it. It's a bit dry, but you got food in hand. And if you get a little bit of cream cheese to go with it, well heck, you're doing alright. But when's the last time you sat down and ate a brick of cream cheese? The same is with color. We may like it the most, but it goes on top of something good already. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's start with a simple question. What is color? In the most literal sense, it is a specific frequency of light. In the past, we used to think of the color as a manifestation of some sort of spiritual essence. People would let pigments rest for 3 days to sanctify them, since that was the time of Christ's resurrection. Or they thought of them as a mixture of light and shadow as per Aristotle, which is actually closer to reality than you may think. White light contains the full spectrum of colors within and displays such through a prism. So, we have a new axiom to consider. Color is light, and light is color. The first thing to discuss is the language surrounding colors. Words like brightness are okay for day-to-day use, but when discussing specifics, not so much. There are 4 ways to think about a color: the hue, the tone, the saturation, and the temperature. Hue is the simplest aspect. It is the family of whatever color is at hand, and what you already know as color. Reds, yellows, blues, they're all hues. Each comes with various sensations and concepts that we can use to communicate an idea, some being psychological in their origin, some cultural and through practice. Green's association of nature comes from the omnipresence within the natural world. As we grow up, the mere exposure within those contexts brings it to mind whenever we see it. It could also represent money, provided your subject is in the right culture and the right time. But being a cultural concept, that idea only extends so far. In the Middle Ages, money was represented mostly with yellow. If you were rich, yellow clothing was a thing to wear. Being the hue of gold, of course, lent it a certain luster. But there were commercial reasons as well. Yellow mars with the slightest blemish due to its lightness. If you want to dye something yellow, you needed very, very white cloth, and that's not easy to find in a pre-industrial society. What is easy to find is my classes at Las Vegas Open. You thought you were safe? Not for my sales pitch, you aren't. I have 3 subjects and 4 available slots to inject knowledge juice directly into your frontal lobe. Buy everything. What are you waiting for? God to come down and command your very soul? Give me your money. The second feature of color is tone. Referred sometimes as value, it is pure signal, the sense of lightness or darkness. Put on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being pure black, 10 being white. Every color has a value, and the placement of tonal values is what gives painting structure. Provided that you put the right tones in the right places, you can use whatever color you want. A different color may change what you're trying to say with your work, but it would still make sense to your eye. All the essential data about form, structure, texture, and lighting can come from tone alone.
Yeah.
A good way to check if your model is working is to take a picture of it, set the saturation to 0, and see if it looks good. A well-painted model will lose its flavor, but will still feel stable. If it implodes into a monotone gray mass, then it likely needs more tonal change. Learning to see tonal values, therefore, is of utmost importance to those wishing to advance, although that will take time. Seeing tonality doesn't come as naturally as seeing something like saturation. Speaking of which, this is the visual intensity of color against gray. Saturated hues catch the eye faster than grayer, less identifiable hues, and they have a greater intensity in their emotional communication. Vibrant ruby red has a different message than burgundy, although they do rhyme. Much of art history is in the search of materials that can give a painter this power, and many have lost their lives to have this vigor in their work. Cinnabar red may be quite lovely. Unfortunately, it's also made with mercury compounds, so not something that we use today. Vibrant colors catch the eye, but you do need to be a bit careful with them. Saturated colors are kind of like a diva. She wants the stage all to herself. It's not that she can't work with others, but after 2 or 3 go on stage, there's probably going to be a fight for focus.
Ask next time, or there won't be a next time.
Don't touch me, you better not.
This will be important later. Saturation also doesn't apply to color alone. Your materials can be more or less saturated. Yes, indeed. Paint companies use different formulas, additives, and pigments to create their paints. Model paints focus on coverage, opacity, and a flat finish, as well as consistency. But sometimes this comes at the cost of other features, namely vibrancy of hue. Let's take Reaper for example. Compare the vibrancy of this green to, say, Liquitex High Body. And it's pretty clear that when we lay out both on the paper like this, one is a bit richer, to say the least. Chimera colors are renowned for this, featuring 30 to 50% pigment. That level of saturation is crazy high and can lead to a beautiful finish. But I offer a word of caution to those fiending for vibrancy. While they are lovely colors, they are not easy to tame. I have seen people who don't even know how to paint flat still buy these things, and it makes me a little apprehensive. It's like you just started cooking for 2 or 3 months and you just went out and bought a set of copper pots. I'm not saying don't do that, but you may want to warm up to that kind of intensity. Good materials can give you an edge, but when it comes to learning, they're superfluous. Temperature is also a consideration. Due to learned experience, we have an association with certain colors having specific sensations. You can cut a color wheel on the axis of green and violet to separate the warm and cold colors from one another. Reds, oranges, and yellows are typically warm. Greens, blues, and violets are typically cool. Notice the word typically there. A color's properties relate to the scene at hand. What is warm in one painting could be cold in another, or even cold in relation to the same hue. Green can be warm if it leans yellow, or cold if it leans blue. Red is hot, but this one isn't, at least when you compare it to this one. And this one's cold when compared to this one. Warm colors invoke excitement and energy. The cold soothe and isolate. Again, most of the time. Your average fire is all warm tones and it creates an inviting and cozy effect. If your function has a blue or green fire, you may be in a cult, which I suppose could be exciting depending on how many small animals or versions you have for sacrifice. But the point I'm getting at is that a yellow fire and a blue fire communicate different messages, and this has to be respected for good visual communication. Try all you might, you cannot make blue flames look hotter than yellow ones. Even though they are. Warm colors also have a higher visual priority than cold ones. Katarzyna Gorska uses this principle a lot in her work to direct the eye towards what she wants you to look at, and not towards some random corner of the model. Note that this work has a warm green and a cold violet, even though that could very well be reversed. This L'Ariel model I painted gets its cold sensation from the ubiquitous use of blue. If we shift the hue, and thus temperature, we lose that cold sensation, and we have a new energy. This covers most of the terms regarding color. With this in mind, you can start analyzing the properties of what makes a work in your paintings. But that doesn't quite get us started when it comes to painting at the desk. What colors do you even choose? To get to the real answer of this, we need to consider the tool that we use to organize colors, the color wheel. Color thought traces its roots to Isaac Newton's experiments, but the idea of putting colors into a circle didn't come from the ether. What you need to understand is that in 17th century Europe, a lot of thinking regarding natural science as we understand it was pretty shaky. Alchemy was still hanging around and hadn't evolved into what we know of as chemistry. A lot of thinking men of the day had at least heard of it, and the many tried their hand at it, Newton included. The alchemist's frame of thought is that all matter belongs to a core of basic materials. That's where we get the idea of 4 elements: fire, water, air, earth. If you can break things down into basic elements, you can reconstruct them into something different. They believed everything belonged in a sort of continuum or a wholeness, which they represented with a circle. In 1653, René Descartes, that whole "I think therefore I am" dude, published Excellent Compendium of Music, where he talks about musical theory. At the time, people thought about art akin to how we think about something like physics or chemistry, in that there is some natural law of how it all works and what is optimal. There's more to it than that, and it gets me kind of excited, but it's too off track. And so, when he diagrams the major scales, he uses the perspective of natural law, that of things being in a continuum or wholeness, that of a circle, and he diagrams them as such. All this is going on when Isaac Newton is doing his experiments on color. He finds white light to contain the full spectrum when it passed through a prism. What's interesting to us here is that he arranges them in the exact same way as the major scales Descartes uses. This may seem strange today, but people used to describe music and visual arts as basically being two sides of the same coin. Think about it. Both are creative endeavors, they're somewhat intangible, and they create emotional reactions. So when it comes to arranging his thinking on color, it makes sense that Newton would look to the field of music. Am I saying Newton plagiarized Descartes' design when he made his color wheel? Yes, the design is identical. But now you know why. He was trying to form a link between the visual arts and music. This circular arrangement of color would become the rock of color thinking as we know it today, and it wouldn't take long before people were finding both geometric and sensation-based relationships. Over time, the wheel evolved and shifted as different people gave their takes on this. Some good, some just kinda strange. In 1921, Johannes Itten of the Bauhaus School of Germany made this wheel, and it stuck. It's one of many different interpretations, but we don't have time, so it will do for us. With that bit of history out of the way, let's address the initial question. What color should you use? Well, whatever you want, but a good place to begin is with a template, aka a color scheme. The simplest being monochromatic, a single color with tonal variety. This arrangement is simple and elegant, but a bit tricky to execute. The tonal game has to be quite sharp to make this painting interesting. What can help is the use of an accent hue in an important area to give the work some direction. You can also use different versions of the same hue to give the work some subtle sensations of something unsimilar. If you want more variety, consider an analogous scheme. In effect, you move out from a singular hue to include adjacent neighbors, sorta like a pie slice. These grant a relaxed and mellow mood as the eye ambles around in a similar nature, where it is also common to see, making it effective for fantasy creatures. One thing to point out as we're moving into schemes with more stuff in them is to mind how much of each thing that we're using. A common mistake in coloring is to use all your hues with equal presence on the canvas. Without a clear color driving the ship, the resulting effect is vague and ambiguous, which may be desirable, but not for everything. The old reliable when painting with multiple colors is to use a dominant support and an accent. The dominant takes up the majority of the surface area and creates the largest impression. The support adds variety as well as implementing the dominant feeling, and the accent gives a little splash of interest to focus the eye, or for fun. You've seen this scheme before if you've been in the hobby for any length of time via this humble ultramarine. Dominant blue, supporting gold and yellow, red accents. Simple as. Returning to analogous coloring, mind that you do not go too far of how many colors you use. If you extend an analogous scheme far enough, you'll begin to include contrasting elements like those in a complementary scheme. These use two opposing hues on the wheel. Since the distance between them is so great, these paintings have a tense sensation. They demand a lot of attention and are common to see in advertisements and posters. Like so many posters, holy sh**. All complementary schemes create a striking impression, but it can be too much. The effect can be overwhelming if you overdo it with the saturation of each color, or how much you use of each. If you want maximum coloring, then restrict your complement to a very small area, like a face, as to not crash out on people's eyeballs. An important consideration here is the idea of a stable or a flickering complement. Yellow and violet may clash via hue, but they still have a sense of stability due to the difference in tone. Green and red share very similar tonality by contrast. Since tonality can't guide your eye, the resulting effect is that your gaze darts back and forth between them. One of the best uses of this effect is in Monet's Impression Sunrise. The cyan-orange scheme is a classic complementary, and it gives this piece a great deal of energy, yet the relaxed vibe comes from the tonal level throughout the piece. Sublime. Triads are amongst the most flexible option available to us. 3 colors all equidistant from one another on the wheel, which creates a triangular shape. These arrangements are solid, flexible, and easy to use. Red, yellow, and blue is the classic triad, seen in comics and animation. By altering saturation or tonal levels, there are heaps of ways to make these schemes work out for you. The ultramarine from before is a triad. A good middle ground between a complementary scheme and a triad is a split complement. Instead of a direct opposite hue, you use the adjacent two. These compositions have the flexibility of a triad while possessing some of the extra punch a complementary scheme brings. They too are popular in comics and animation. Dual complements or tetradic schemes are exactly as they sound, 2 sets of complementary colors in the same painting. These schemes have some of the highest amount of variety and interest, as well as a great deal of flexibility of all the color you have. 4 hues is enough to tackle pretty much anything. But with so much going on here, there are many plates to spin via proportion and intensity. It's easy to go, oops, all saturated colors and create an overwhelming mess. But when done well, this scheme can be iconic. While it's sometimes possible to paint a model with only 3 or 4 neat colors, usually you're going to have to fill in some things. Holsters, ornaments, and little details. What about those? One way is to use neutrals like white, black, or brown. This works well, but oftentimes the black or white that you reach for via a tube is not the best for the job. To make effective intermediate colors, create them from your primaries. The term primary color has a lot of confusion behind it. Your painting's primaries are whatever colors come out of the tubes or bottles that you use. Nothing more or less. Secondary colors come from 2 primaries. Tertiary colors come from a primary and a secondary mixed together. If you have a cursory knowledge of art, you may be thinking that red, yellow, and blue are primaries. Well, they are, when the frame of thought is to make an entire spectrum. Burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and phthalo blue could easily contend as being primary colors if you wanted them to be. The truth is, any color can be a primary with the right perspective. If you're some Rembrandt character with limited access to materials, red, yellow, and blue makes sense because they can give you the widest spectrum. But you could also make a painting with whatever brown, black, and white you have on hand. Those would be your primaries in such a painting, and everything would branch off from those. So why is this important? Let's say you have a blue and yellow model. You want to weather it with some green moss that you're going to paint on there. You could reach for some green from your stash, or you can make it from your blue and your yellow. Since it's derived from 2 primaries, the resulting green from this mixture synergizes with everything. The green may not be as vibrant as it could be, but that's good. Desaturated colors have the unique power of taking on the nature of those around them. They don't have a strong visual punch, but they can work in most any scheme. When in doubt, mix your intermediates up. The key to good coloring is to introduce as few colors as you can get away with. You'll have a far easier time pleasing the eye if you have a single red, yellow, and blue than 3 of each. That doesn't mean you have to mix everything on a project. You could get a similar result by carefully choosing specific mixtures. If you need to recreate a specific result, then a systematic coloring can help you. It's desirable in something like an army, where you may have months in between painting something in the same scheme again. But when you're using primary colors and mixing like an artist, it's a good idea to use the most saturated colors for your primaries. You can mute them down, but you cannot make them any stronger. When a bottle says something innocuous like magenta, I always am a little suspect. Don't make me say it. Because this bottle is not magenta, at least not purely so. This is magenta. I'm not an expert, but something looks quite different here. Why? Well, I'll tell you. Another day. Take care and have a good one.